I know a lot of you are here thinking that I'm going to talk about technology today, but you'll be sorely disappointed. But today I'd really like to talk about the subject of storytelling. If we look at the Bible, and we'll talk about this later, but if you look at the Bible as a storybook, or the Bible with stories of storytellers who are telling stories, and what those things are that we can learn from. And I just kind of took a step back at some of the sermons that I've done in the past, the unjust steward, the prodigal son, even the unlikely hero, talking about Rahab the harlot. And at the core of those narratives are stories. There's lessons that we can learn. And I know some people might say, well, hey, calling the Bible a storybook kind of, maybe you think less of it, but I don't look at it that way, because if you look at what storytelling is and you look at what stories are, it truly is what the Bible is about. I mean, it's the story of the beginning of time to the end of time. It's the story of Jesus Christ and all that He's done for us. So with that, I kind of wanted to take a step back and maybe look at what secular society thinks about stories. What are elements of good stories? What do we classify as good stories? And how does the Bible align with that? Is God a good storyteller? And a lot of us would say, well, yeah, absolutely, He's a good storyteller. But unfortunately for me, I want fact. I want proof. I just don't want to make a statement and then just blindly accept it. I want to dig in a little bit deeper and see what I can uncover. And the deeper I got, the more I studied this topic, the more fascinating it really became. So I'm not looking to finish it all in one shot. If Pastor doesn't want me to finish it, that's fine with me. I got no problem with that. James is more than welcome. Pastor Gerald is more than welcome. Anybody else is more than welcome too. So I don't want to rush through it. It's going to take a little bit of time to set up, so just bear with me. We'll have a lot of stories in there, but I think at the end, it's my hope that we'll even get a greater appreciation for the Bible and what God did delivering it to us in that format, as opposed to a bunch of PowerPoint slides with bullets on it. I remember with PowerPoint and bullets, somebody told me that the only thing bullets do is kill people. Thought about that, and I'm like, yeah. But just looking at that and be blessed, and then how can we use that as a tool ourselves? As if we're always trying to model or follow the example that Christ put before us. How can we use the things He did, to make us better professionally or personally or spiritually? So that's my plan. We'll see how far we get today. So I want to start first with a gentleman called David Phillips. He was an international speaker, author, and coach, and he gave a TED Talk in 2017 entitled The Magical Science of Storytelling. In his talk, he tells the story of a journalist, Rob Walker, who in 2009 wanted to find the answer to this question: is storytelling the most powerful tool of all? To do this, he went on his computer and purchased 200 items from eBay, all of with an average price of $1. He then called 200 authors and asked them to write a unique, truthful story about each one of those objects. He then took those 200 items, now with their unique story, and put them back on eBay to be sold. One of the items that he purchased was this awful statue of a horse's head. Just ugly. Just ugly. He purchased it for 99 cents. When that horse's head was posted, along with its unique story on eBay, it sold for almost $63. Which is an increase of almost 6,000%. The journalist thought to himself, maybe this is just a one-off occurrence. When the last item was purchased, his experiment was over, And he soon discovered, when he tallied up all that he sold those 200 objects for, that he bought them for a total of $129. And he ended up selling them for more than $8,000. All thanks to just a story. Just something that gave that object a little bit more life, a little bit more flavor, a different way to connect with us. Then he stood back and he said, is it possible? Is it really possible for us to be so manipulated by a story? I mean, have you ever heard a story? I mean, the obvious answer is yes, this is rhetorical. But have you ever heard a story, be it book, television, or movie, that so profoundly affected you that you were motivated to make a change in your life? I mean, if you think about your conversion story, once you heard about Jesus for the first time and what he did for you and how he just took care of every problem that you had in your life, did that motivate you to make a change? Did it motivate you to change directions and follow him? If we look at our young people, are they motivated by stories? Take them, take your girls to whatever new princess movie is out there. I guarantee you will be buying princess costumes after that movie because they want to do imitation. Take your sons to some superhero movie or read them a superhero book. Guarantee you after that you will be purchasing some type of superhero costume. And even if you don't purchase it, they'll be out there acting like Spider-Man or Superman or whatever it is. But they're motivated through these stories. They're motivated to change. They express themselves through imitation. Now, unfortunately, some adults will do that. They'll go see these movies, maybe James Bond or something like that, and they'll come out and they'll say, I want to be James Bond. For adults, it's not as cute as it is for the kids. But if you think about the good stories, and first I'm going to look at it from more of a secular approach, and then we'll kind of get deeper into the Bible side of it. But the power of storytelling really comes down to one thing. There's an emotional investment. If you think about the stories that grip you, the movies you watch, or the books you read, there's an emotional investment in there. There's something that hooks you. There's something that grabs you. I always think one of my favorite movies is Lord of the Rings. And here you've got this whole story of Frodo and how he's got to get the ring to destroy it. He's got to put it in the, I can't even remember now, Mordor. And he's got to go there and he's got to destroy the ring. And he goes through all these trials and tribulations to get there. And he's on the precipice, about ready to throw this ring that he's been battling for control this whole story. It's been trying to control him. And just at that precipice, when you're like, yes, he's going to throw that ring in there, he stops. He turns around. He walks back. The ring has temporarily won. And now if you watch the story, you'll see how it unfolds and how all that gets taken care of. But you're just sucked in because you've walked on this journey with this character for so long, with all the ups and downs that he's gone through. And he's finally reached the climax where the good guys are going to win, and he has a moment of failure. The final failure in some ways. But you see how he pushes through. I think about even movies that I recently watched about the Avengers Endgame. You've got Captain America. Everybody's just beat down around him. The only one standing is Captain America against all the forces of evil. And it's just him. And you're like, there's no way that this guy's going to win. No way. No way. And the story goes on, and you've got an emotional investment because you've paid over $1,000 to watch all these movies, from 1 to 20 or 20, however many they are. So you are not only emotionally invested, but you are financially invested in these stories as well. You want to know the end. But it's just, you ask that, like, why do you do that? There's an emotional investment. I can either relate to that character in some way. I can follow his story. I can empathize with him. So there's that emotional investment. And when we're emotionally invested in something, we're subject to these marvelous little chemicals called hormones and neurotransmitters. And if you think of neurotransmitters, they're just chemical messengers. And we shouldn't be surprised because Psalm 139:14 says, we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Like God has given us these chemicals, these biological components to do some marvelous things, some wonderful things in our body. And when we hear a good story, hormones such as oxytocin or dopamine and endorphins are just released in our bodies. Take dopamine. The effects of dopamine as it flows through your body are three things. You become more focused. You are more motivated for action. And lastly, your brain's ability to remember things is greatly enhanced. Just from this flood of this hormone, dopamine. So how does storytelling release these types of hormones? So I thought I would maybe give the author's story, his example, but I don't think that would really resonate. So I'm going to get personal with you for about the next 10 minutes, and I'm going to tell you a story. And let's see how if I'm successful at it, we'll hopefully get a dopamine rush and some of these other hormones after. If I fail at it, we'll just pretend it worked marvelously and we'll move along. But seriously, I'm going to take you back to the spring of 2003. My wife and I were pregnant she was pregnant with our second child.
It's your fault.
It is my fault. It is definitely my fault. And I may have been reminded of that at different times. But we were pregnant with our second child, and we were scheduled to go to our routine ultrasound visit. We were excited to see the baby, see how he or she was progressing. We weren't going to find out what it is. We already had one, a boy, and it's like, we'll just go with whatever the Lord gives us this next time around. And it was supposed to be routine. With my wife laying on the ultrasound table, the technician began to do her work. She takes that cold gel and puts it all around and takes that thing and starts ramming it into my wife's stomach. But within several minutes, my wife and I both noticed something was not right. The technician looked confused. You could just tell by the look on her face. And she kept pushing harder on my wife's stomach with that ultrasound device, trying to get a better angle or a better picture of something we could tell did not look right to her. She was not good at hiding what was going on there. And after a few more minutes, she left the room. And we sat there in silence. We were confused as to what was going on. Okay, let's just not make any judgments. We'll just sit back. We may have even said a prayer. And then the technician walked back into the room and asked us to step into a different room, which is new experience. We're supposed to come in for the ultrasound, check some boxes, told to have a nice day. Now we were moved to a different room. It was odd. It didn't happen with our first child, Zachary. And we're in this small room. There's a table, and there's a phone on the table, and there's a couple chairs. And we sat there quietly, patiently, waiting for what seemed like an eternity, wondering what is going on. Then the technician or the nurse, I can't remember which, comes back into the room, does something with the phone, and the next thing we heard over the phone was a doctor from another hospital introducing himself. And as most doctors are, this one was very straight to the point and told us that our baby had a life-threatening heart defect called hypoplastic left heart syndrome. And while treatable, the prognosis was not very good. There was a good chance that we could lose our baby. I was shocked. When you hear that news, I was shocked and confused. How could this be? This is routine. People do this thousands of times a day. They go get the ultrasound. My wife and I should be eating lunch right now. We should be talking about our baby, enjoying the excitement of the unknown. Was it going to be a boy or a girl? We shouldn't be sitting in this cold, small room talking to a doctor over a phone. I could see the tears welling up in my wife's eyes. And I was holding back my own. Guys, we got to be strong for our wives. We can't show any chinks in our armor. And we finally left that office dumbfounded and got into the car. It was a blur, but I'm sure we held hands and prayed. And then we left to go to my parents' house to share with them the news. It was a quiet ride. I mean, my operation or my thought process is I just got to be quiet. I just got to process. I just got to let everything run through. My thoughts were going, why, God? Why would you allow this to happen? What good can possibly come out of this? I mean, come on. Putting my child's life at risk? I mean, what am I going to learn? What am I going to learn from this? Aren't there other ways? Aren't there other ways you can do this? What lessons are you trying to teach us? Because I believed in my heart that if God did not want that to happen, he could have stepped in and prevented that. But he allowed that to happen to our baby. Again, why do you have to use the life of my son or daughter to teach me a lesson? And then, how are we going to get through this? What if the worst happens? How are we going to get over that? Are we going to still be Christians on the other side of this? I felt like pastor's teaching is teaching, and then these life experiences are exams. And honestly, I felt this was a final exam. I mean, if we didn't pass this baby, I didn't know what was going to happen. Was my faith going to be so shaken that I would give it up? Those are the things that I was thinking. I began to feel frustration and anger. I got angry at God. I'll be honest. I mean, he knew it. And then not long after that, it was fear. What are we going to do? So fast forward. We had a plan in place. Our faith was strengthened by God. We knew he was going to carry us through this. He did a lot of things in that short time to give us strength. So my wife and I and our pastor and parents met with the team of doctors. It was time to get together and put the delivery plan. What was the plan? What was the course of action? These were the doctors who were going to be responsible for finalizing the delivery plan for Joshua. And we went, we decided, hey, we want to know if it's a boy or a girl. And we want to give him a name that means something. And we chose Joshua because it stood for God is salvation. And we honestly believed whatever happened, we were going to enjoy the salvation of God. So we all sat at a big table. My wife and I on one side, we got pastor on this side, and my parents on the other side. And across from us was the whole team of doctors, maybe 3, 4, 5. One of them was going to be Josh's cardiologist from that point forward. And like most meetings, it began with pleasantries and introductions, and then it took a direction we were not expecting. When one of the doctors point blankly asked us, why don't you just terminate the pregnancy? And I'm sure my face was, did he just say what he just said? He went on. There's little chance this baby, and I don't even know if he referred to him as a baby. I can't remember. I don't want to paint the doctor in a worse sense than he already was. But there was some sense that he wasn't even looking at it as a viable life. But he went on, is this baby even going to have quality of life? I mean, how much of a financial burden is this baby, if it is successfully delivered, going to put on you and your wife? And I just stood there. And again, is this guy really saying what he's saying? What is going on? I thought doctors were about saving lives, right? I thought that's what their purpose is. And this is my son that you're talking about. You want me to give up on my son? I understand that the situation is bleak, but we had God on our side. And multiple times, He has proven to us that He will not give up on us. He's going to carry us through no matter what it is. So if God's not going to give up on me, why am I going to give up on my son? Again, I was shocked at what I was hearing. And then that shock turned to anger. And then determination and defiance. And I looked that doctor in the face and I told him, no. And he persisted. And again, I told him, no. And he went on and he said that I was probably saying no because my pastor was right there. And then I was thinking to myself, I'm about to do something that my pastor would not want me to do. I'm about ready to come over that table. But thankfully, I stayed in control and I told him no, one last time. And thankfully, the cardiologist interrupted and told the doctor enough. It was obvious that we were determined to have this baby and that the termination was not an option for us. And it was time to move on to finalizing the delivery plan. Fast forward to August 14th, 2003. I was at work. Around 4:10 p.m., the power went out. And for those of you that remember, it stayed out. 21 power plants had gone offline in 3 minutes, affecting 50 million people in Detroit, New York, Cleveland, and some parts of Canada. After about an hour, I left to go home. That evening was fairly routine, saving for the fact that I had an extremely pregnant wife and no air conditioning. And what started off as fairly routine turned miserable as my wife just could not get comfortable at night. The heat was unbearable. A little after midnight, we decided to head over to my parents. They had a finished basement. It would be cooler, and my wife could get some much needed rest. I'm not even sure if you had power or not. They didn't have power either, but we knew it was going to be cooler. And when we arrived at my parents' house, only to have my wife tell me that it was time. I'm like, time for what? Okay, I'm known for those brilliant questions. Time for what? Yeah, yes. Time for Joshua, she replied. I thought, no way, we can't have this baby tonight. There's no power. And this thing was not going to be fixed in the next couple of days. We got to wait. She informed me there was going to be no waiting. So our youngest son, Zachary, stayed with my dad, and my mom joined us in the ride up to Ann Arbor. Yes, Ann Arbor. Joshua had to be delivered at Mott's Children's Hospital more than an hour away. So we hopped in the car and began our drive. We had to take a residential road to get to the expressway, which normally wasn't going to be fast. Clock was ticking. As we drove down the road, it's probably about 1 a.m, but as we drove down Mound Road, there were 0 cars on Mound. I mean 0, none. And the traffic lights at every intersection were out. It was complete and utter darkness. What should have taken us about 25 minutes took us about 10 minutes to get to the expressway. And I think we were up in Ann Arbor in no time at all. It's amazing how fast you can go when there are no traffic lights. Or you obey the traffic, or don't obey the traffic lights, I suppose. But We pulled up to Ann Arbor, and you could hear the hum of the generators. No power at Ann Arbor other than the generators. We prayed again. God had gotten us through this far, the dips and valleys, and we knew He would continue to see us through. And we were going to hold on to that for dear life. We were admitted in the hospital, and it was hot. Apparently, air conditioning is a non-essential system, even in the maternity ward. Nurses had towels draped across their necks, trying to keep cool. They examined Sheila, and in no time at all, we were ushered into a large room. For those that don't know, U of M is a teaching hospital. So they have a lot of interns there and students. So they usher us into this large room with a single bed in the middle. So surrounded by a group of doctors and medical students, my wife gave birth to our son Joshua. Joy filled my heart. Like, we have made it. Like, these past 4 or 5 months have been hell, and we made it to this point. But this was the easy part. Because when he was in Sheila's womb, her body was doing a lot of the work for him, pumping the blood through. But now it was going to be his body. He was going to have to undergo 3 open heart surgeries by age 2. But that didn't matter right now. We were taking this one step at a time. I think they let my wife hold Joshua for 5 seconds. It was literally dropped him in her bosom, counted to 5, took him away. Because they had to get him stabilized. Because his first open heart surgery was going to be in just a couple days. So they laid him in a small bed, and a contingent of doctors and nurses huddled around him, wiring up to monitors, setting up IVs, preparing him for the next steps. And I don't think we got to see him for a couple of hours. And when we did, it was heartbreaking. You have this small baby with jet black hair, with wires and tubes all over the place. To hold him, we had to be extremely careful. But hold him we did. We were thankful we had made it this far. But we knew the next couple of days, the next couple of years, were going to be a tough journey. We realized our faith was being tested, and while we had hit some bumps in the road, we had our doubts. It was strengthened each and every day. Over the next 2 years, Joshua had 3 open heart surgeries, one at a few days, another around 6 months, and then another one around 18 months after he was born. Each time we turned him over to the nurses and doctors was gut-wrenching. I couldn't help but think, would this be the last time I would hold him? The last surgery was the hardest. He had developed quite a personality and was more aware of what was happening now. I can remember that day vividly. They gave him some Versed to relax him, and we sat there with him as he waited to be taken back to surgery. Here come the nurses, pulling a little red wagon. They asked him if he was ready to go. He's kind of in a phase, kind of in a fog. Versed does some wonderful things to you, and he said yes. And they helped him into that little red wagon. And we watched the nurses take him away. I mean, that's tough. Here's this little boy, arms hanging out of the little red wagon, doesn't have a clue, really, as to what he's going into. And you're his parents, there's nothing you can do for him. It's truly in the hands of God. Thank God those surgeries were successful. Joshua is now 16 years old, a junior in high school. He's a wonderful kid. He's probably one of the funniest kids I know. A little annoying, but funny. He has a job. I mean, he plays varsity basketball. As I said, this journey has not been without its bumps in the road. And I realize there's going to be more in the future. But we've been blessed. I've been blessed for having him. And this is not a journey I would have chosen. Like if the Lord would have asked me, hey, how would you like to do this for your number 2 kid? I would have said, no way. No way. I'm still nonetheless thankful for it. God has taught me much, and for that, I'm eternally grateful. And I'm not pausing for effect. I'm pausing to get my notes here. So another hormone, and then we'll tie it all together. Oxytocin. When oxytocin is flowing through our body, we become more generous. We trust the storyteller more. And lastly, we bond with the storyteller. And if I conveyed my story successfully, whether you wanted to or not, dopamine and oxytocin are flowing through your bodies right now. And for those of you that can relate to what I went through, you've even got higher volumes of it going through. You are focused. You may have even lost track of time. You feel more human. Because I've expressed an area where I was vulnerable. I expressed an area where there were lows. We love lows because we've all been there. You probably feel more relaxed. Again, you might have bonded. And you'll probably remember elements of this story. Elements, because some of you are very old, and you'll probably remember far less of it. But you will probably remember elements of it for a long time to come. And if you look at storytelling, what does good storytelling do? It creates empathy. And by empathy, I mean the ability to share in the feelings or experiences of others. And that's usually done through characters. I mean, how many of you people maybe put yourself in my shoes? Like, oh man, I'm a dad. I can't imagine going through that. Or put yourself in Sheila's shoes. You know, I'm a mom. How did she do that? I know how I would. How did she do that? Or maybe as the son, or as Josh. And we didn't even talk about like grandparents, and we didn't even talk about pastor, or we didn't even talk about really the church members and other people that were affected by this. But you relate. A good story pulls you in. You sympathize. You might find other areas. I don't have that exact experience, but boy, I know what he's going through. I know what she's going through. The last hormone is endorphins. And endorphins are awesome. Okay? They are awesome. They are those hormones that produce wonderful feelings of euphoria, of intense excitement, and happiness. I mean, when we were going through that story, there were a couple, funnies in there. But as we're going through this up and down, if a story's told right, you're going to have these moments of sadness. And then the storyteller's going to bring you up, and you're going to have more moments of happiness. And ultimately, you want that final climax to be happiness. That's what endorphins do. Those are endorphins. And you got to admit that it's pretty powerful. Storytelling is pretty powerful as a tool to focus, to motivate, to create empathy between the storyteller and their audience. So you might think, again, this is great information. Thank you for giving us a wonderful story. But how does this really tie into a sermon? And I touched on it a little bit at the beginning. But when we look at these stories, when we think about stories, if we think of what a good story is and what its purpose is, A good story should teach you something. It should teach you something. It might teach you something good. It might teach you something bad. But there's an element to being taught. Again, why do we read countless books? Why do we watch countless movies? Ask my kids, what's my favorite movie? Christian movie where somebody dies. And if there's a sport in there, sign me up. Okay? But again, the point of it is why do I like movies where people die? Because it makes me feel more human. I can't relate to Superman. I can't fly. I can't do the many things he can. But can I relate to somebody who goes through a struggle or goes through rough times and it loses somebody that they love? Absolutely. Do I get teary-eyed in those movies? Absolutely. Makes me feel human. Makes me feel human. Think about how you sit around the dinner table with your kids. Ask them about their day. What are you doing? You're exchanging stories. I can still remember Gracie's first day at school. I was at camp with the boys, and I called her up, and I said, how was school today? She said, Dad. She's like, there's drama. She's like, this girl hit this girl. And Gracie was homeschooled. Not that she's never seen people hit each other. She's got brothers. She's witnessed that. But this girl slapped this girl, and this girl slapped her back. I mean, the look on her face, it was like this new experience. I'm like, okay, well, hey, this stuff happens. She goes, but wait. She's like, there's boy drama, too. But what was she telling me? She was telling me a story. And what's my emotional commitment to that? She's my daughter. I'm very interested in what she has to say. And that's what we're doing when we're sitting around that dinner table. Sit with a group of old people. Okay, and I'm about 10 years out from that. But all they do is tell stories about this ailment or that ailment. Or, hey, I'm taking 10 pills and I'm taking 15 pills. Like they're trying to outdo themselves with their story about pain and suffering. Okay? And I won't even get into like the restroom habits, because that's a whole nother topic. But God bless old people. They can talk about that for hours. But that's how they're connecting. They're telling stories. Snories, I don't think that's a word, but stories. So, if we step back, look at all that, and then look at the Bible. The stories in the Bible are where we learn more about God. If God was to give us a PowerPoint presentation on himself, I don't know if I could make it through slide 1. I already struggle. If I think too long about the Trinity and what that is and how that works, my brain just kind of, I can understand some certain things, but when you really go down to it, my brain starts to fall apart. And God understands that. So he gives us these stories where we can learn more about him. We can learn about his attributes and his characteristics and his kingdom. And more importantly, what his expectations are for mankind. And I wondered, what was the draw? Like, I understand that stories are entertaining, and I understand that they teach, but I wanted to get a little bit deeper. I wanted to get a better understanding. Why did the Bible use storytelling as its primary medium? If you think about the Old Testament, lots of stories. Gospels, lots of stories. Then you get into some the books which are more historical in nature, but even those are stories. You get some doctrinal, Paul, I don't know if Paul was the greatest storyteller. I can't think of a story he told maybe off the top of my mind, but not compared to Jesus. Most of what Jesus did was told in stories. So when we look at the Bible, it's composed of stories, and as I said earlier, sometimes stories within stories. That's what I want to look at. I want to take a look at storytelling, and I want to see how the Bible uses storytelling. If the secular world says, hey, you can be successful this way with storytelling, and these are the reasons why it's powerful, my bet is that's why the Bible's using it. But I wanted to dig in and get a thorough understanding of it. So that's the introduction. So as Pastor always does, let's take a step back and let's define our terms. What do we mean by storytelling and story? Storytelling describes the social and cultural activity of sharing stories, sometimes with improvisation, theatrics, or embellishment. If you think about the earliest of times, okay, back Adam and Eve, the Bible wasn't there yet. A lot of the things that were communicated were through stories, oral tradition. You know, you can see oral tradition go into written tradition, and then it can move on to more of movies and television. But a story is an account of series of related events, experiences, or the like, whether true or fictitious. So stories cover the true stuff. Stories cover the fiction. They're sometimes called accounts, answers, chronicles, testimonies, or reports. So there's only two uses of the word story in the Bible. There are uses of the word stories, but it's referring to different levels. But there are multiple uses of the word accounts, answers, chronicles, testimonies, and reports. I mean, two of the books are 1st and 2nd Chronicles. Parables or allegories are types of stories. You know, parables are those little short stories that give us a lesson in morality. And where allegories are stories that are they have a hidden moral or political meaning. So, with that concept of storytelling in front of us, what is it used for? Well, storytelling can be used for entertainment, right? A lot of good movies out there, a lot of good books out there that are purely for entertainment. You know, any Transformers movie. You know, the first Transformers movie, I watched it. Somebody said, "Is that a good story?" Yes. What happened in it? I have no idea. I don't know what the plot was, but a lot of big robots fought and blew each other up. I was very entertained. Did you learn anything? Robots blow up when they fight each other. But that's just those are for pure entertainment. There'll be small subplots in there, but granted, a lot of the movies nowadays are just technical effects. I mean, there's no story, there's no character development. But storytelling is also a means for education, cultural preservation, and or instilling moral values. And the areas that I really want to focus on is education and moral values. Something interesting is if you think of that word testimony, it's another word for story. And testimony is the noun form of testify. And turn with me to John 5:39. Because again, while we don't see that word story in there, there are meanings in it. And if we think about testimony and testifying as being a means for storytelling, John 5:39 says, "Search the Scriptures, for in them ye think ye have eternal life, and they are they which testify of me." What? The Scriptures tell the story of Jesus from beginning to end. From beginning to end. If you look for it, you'll find the story of Jesus in there. I mean, doesn't the gospel mean good news? For those of you that still watch the news, I gave it up years ago because it just made my life, nothing good came out of watching the news. Except I got angry. And I really tried to avoid being angry. But if you think about it, the gospel is good news. What is news? What do news reporters report? They report stories. They lead with a story. In the newspaper are stories. So I think it would be safe to think of the Gospels, and the entire Bible for that matter, as a storyteller. Telling the story of man, his God, and his Redeemer, or Judge, right? Depending on which side you fall on, from the beginning of time to its end. That's the Gospel. That's the Bible. They're good stories. They're means for us to educate ourselves, educate our children, as well as get a deeper moral understanding of what God expects from us. So why, we kind of laid it out a little bit, but let's go just a little bit deeper into why do we tell stories. Psychologists and professional storyteller, now that's a great job. I don't know how you get that, professional storyteller. But Vanessa Boris, in her article titled, "What Makes Storytelling So Effective for Learning," writes, "Telling stories is one of the most powerful means that leaders have to influence, teach, and inspire." If I want to influence somebody, if I want to teach them something or I want to inspire them, I could use storytelling. So let's look at an example. Turn with me to Luke 10. Luke 10, and we're going to read verses 25 through 37. And as we go through these, I'm going to try to pull in some of the Bible stories so that we can kind of use them with these points, kind of compare with what these authors or what these other people are saying and seeing if we can find some type of connection. So Luke 10:25 through 37, "And behold, a certain lawyer stood up and tempted him, saying, 'Master, what shall I do to inherit eternal life?' This is Jesus talking, and he said unto him, 'What is written in the law? How readest thou?' And he answering said, 'Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy strength, and with all thy mind, and thy neighbor as thyself.'" Did I get the reference right? Okay. And he said unto him, "Thou hast answered right. This do, and thou shalt live." But he, willing to justify himself, said unto Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And Jesus answering said, now he didn't just say, "Hey, that guy's your neighbor," or "this person who's going through trouble is your neighbor." He answers it with the story. "A certain man went down from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves, which stripped him of his raiment and wounded him and departed, leaving him half dead." And you'll see this as we get a little further down the line. One of the ways to pull people in is to kind of lead them, get them a hook right from the beginning. That verse right there is a great example of that. Here you are, you're hooked. You got this guy. He falls among thieves. He gets beaten up. He's naked. He's laying there for dead. If you didn't know anything about the Bible or about that story and I stopped, a lot of you would be very unhappy. Be like, "Hey, I got to know what happened to that guy. Even if I don't like it, I got to know what happens to that guy at the end." "And by chance there came down a certain priest that way. And when he saw him, he passed by on the other side. And likewise a Levite, when he was at the place, came and looked on him and passed by on the other side. But a certain Samaritan, as he journeyed, came where he was. And when he saw him, he had compassion on him, and went to him, and bound up his wounds, pouring in oil and wine, and set him on his own beast, and brought him to an inn, and took care of him. And on the morrow, when he departed, he took out 2 pence, and gave them to the host, and said unto him, Take care of him, and whatsoever thou spendest more, when I come again, I will repay thee. Which now of these thinkest thou, of these 3 thinkest thou, was neighbor unto him that fell among the thieves? And he said," and this is the lawyer, "and he said, He that showed mercy on him. Then said Jesus unto him, Go and do likewise." Which was more effective? Jesus taking the time to lay out this story? Because if you don't get the end, there's no hope for you. Like, he's laid it out. He's backed you into a corner. You have to draw your own conclusion. He could have pulled up the PowerPoint presentation and said, "Hey, here's 3 people, this guy, this Samaritan is your neighbor." But he took the time to tell the story, to walk that guy through the thought process, to actually get him to come to his own conclusion, which is very, very powerful. Very powerful. If I can take that extra 5 minutes, now sometimes I can't, but if I can take that extra 5 minutes and walk you through a story where you draw your own conclusion, have I really condemned you? You could say I kind of did, but I didn't. I really didn't. All I did was tell you a story. If you felt convicted by it, hey, that's you. If you don't feel convicted by it, it's like, hey, I'm still good. I'm still good. But that is very, very powerful. You can even see examples where stories are used to preserve culture, history, and values. And we don't have to turn to this one. But in Joshua 4:4-7, when Joshua takes the Israelites across the Jordan River, he tells them to get some stones, right? Get some stones, and then we're going to set these up. So that when your children come by and see these stones, what are they going to ask? Hey, what are those rocks for? What are those rocks for? And that's where the fathers, the mothers, would sit down with the kids and say, hey, let me tell you about those rocks. Let me tell you of the story of how God brought his people through the Jordan River. When it comes to our countries, our communities, and our families, we understand intuitively that the stories we hold in common are an important part of what binds us together. Okay? Civil War. Okay? Great American story. But it probably only holds value for Americans. You know? No offense, Canadians might look at it and say, hey, that's a great story, I understand them, but it's not about my country. You know, and if you think about culture, if you think about even religion, you think about the stories of the Bible. How many times have you told somebody a story in the Bible, or a story you picked up in the Bible, and they just kind of looked at you kind of foggy-eyed? But if I tell you a story, or you tell me a story from the Bible that either convicts me or encourages me, culturally, religiously, spiritually, we have a connection with that. Paul Smith, in his book, Lead with the Story, provides several reasons why we should tell stories. First of all, storytelling is simple. It's simple. Even some of our simple rhymes, right? Mary had a little lamb, Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, everywhere that Mary went, whatever, that lamb was sure to go, okay? So, the lamb, very loyal to Mary. Very loyal to Mary. Now, I learned that there's a different version of Mary Had a Little Lamb. And it's called Mary Had a Little Lamb, Chick, Chick, Bam, No More Lamb. Mary had a little lamb, her fleece was red as blood. And now Mary's lamb is dinner. It goes something like that. So the lesson there is that lamb meat is good, right? So, but I never knew that there was that side of Mary Had a Little Lamb, and now you know, and all you are going to be going home, go, what's that? Mary had a little lamb, chick, chick, bam. You know, chick, chick, bam. No more lamb, okay? But it's simple. Anyone can do it. You don't need a degree in English. Whether you're young or old, doesn't matter. And your best stories are told from personal experiences. If you think about it, why does the Lord put us through certain trials and tribulations? Why? Well, hey, somebody else is going to go through that same thing. And you're going to have an opportunity to share your story with them and show them how you got through that. That's powerful. That's powerful. Again, just from your experiences. That's the way the Lord's wired us. We get those, you read the story of Job. I don't believe anybody has ever had it in this church as bad as Job. As bad as Job. You know, I think in a matter of an hour, a few hours, he lost everything. Everything. And he questioned God, just like we do. He questioned God. You know, he actually got to plead his case before God. I'm thankful that I don't get to do that because I know how that's going to go. But the whole thing is that we can draw comfort from that story. But then when we look at the stories, the experiences that we go through and the ability that we have to share those with others, especially if we've gone through the similar experiences they have, how powerful, how helpful, how motivating that story is. So don't be afraid to tell your story. Don't be afraid to tell your story. So it's simple. It's timeless. Storytelling is not a fad, okay? They've always worked to teach, and they always will. Again, the Bible is filled with stories to teach us. Let's turn to Judges 11. Judges 11, 30 through 35. Okay? Not one of the happiest ending stories, but definitely a lesson to be learned there. Judges 11, 30 through 35. And Jephthah vowed a vow unto the Lord, and said, If thou shalt without fail deliver the children of Ammon into my hands, then it shall be that whatsoever cometh forth of the doors of my house to meet me, when I return in peace from the children of Ammon, shall surely be the Lord's, and I will offer it up for a burnt offering. So Jephthah passed over unto the children of Ammon to fight against them, and the Lord delivered them into his hands. Great. Made this vow. Lord delivered. All right. And he smote them from Aor, even till thou come to Minnith, even 20 cities, and unto the plain of the vineyards, with a very great slaughter. Thus the children of Ammon were subdued before the children of Israel. And Jephthah came to Mizpah unto his house, and behold, his daughter came out to meet him with timbrels and with dances. What did he vow? Whatever came out of his house first, he was going to offer as a burnt offering. And she was his only child. Beside her he had neither son nor daughter. And it came to pass when he saw her that he rent his clothes and said, Alas, my daughter, thou hast brought me very low, and thou art one of them that trouble me. For I have opened my mouth unto the Lord, and I cannot go back. He made this foolish vow. This foolish vow. So the lesson learned there is be careful what you promise to the Lord. Okay? How that story ends, you'll have to go figure it out for yourself. But the point I get from it is I better be very, very careful what I vow to the Lord. What I vow to the Lord. So these stories, you can tell that story. We're telling it today. I mean, how many stories in the Bible are we just keep telling over and over and over again? The sad thing nowadays is that you will tell the neighborhood kids come over. You might mention some story about David and Goliath or Samson. They don't have a clue what you're talking about. At least 20, 30, 40 years ago, there was still some element that people shared these stories. So when you talked about, oh, hey, you know, that struggle you're going through, or that, you know, that team, that sports team you're playing, it's kind of like David and Goliath. They have no point of reference. No point of reference. But these stories are timeless. Good stories are timeless. They're also demographic proof. Okay, that's a fancy word for meaning regardless of age, race, gender, good stories, people, everybody likes stories. I have not met a single person, maybe a dead person, but I have not met a single person who does not like a story. Now, they might like completely different stories than I do, okay? But everybody likes stories. You know, I'll just leave it at that. I could say something funny, but I'll keep it at that. Think about our Bible stories. They're told thousands and thousands of years ago. These stories, you know, and they're still resonating with us. They're still teaching us. We still learn new things from them. Pastors still pulling new things out of them. When we're doing our personal Bible reading, we're pulling new things out of them. I think we'll be doing that for eternity. Look at Jesus' audience. When he gave his stories, his audience consisted of all types of people, from the lowest in society, the harlots, to the most hated in society, still around today, the tax collectors. But again, if you think about the tax collectors back then, a lot of them were Jews working for the Romans. So it was like double hated. You know, you're coming to get my money, and they would skim off the top. So you've got the lowest in society, the most hated in society, maybe closely followed by the religious leaders, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, the scribes, who were very oppressive to the people. And then you had the Romans themselves. You had the centurions, you had Pilate, you had Herod, and all the other soldiers and people that Jesus ran into. But his stories, when he would tell them, would address multiple audiences at once. And we'll touch on this. We'll go briefly through the prodigal son. I know I did a deeper study on that, but you'll see that story was taught to the scribes, the Pharisees, the harlots. All those people were there, and each one of them identified with different characters in those stories. But all these stories, whether you're old or young or wherever you are in society, a good story will speak to most everyone. You'll be motivated. You'll be moved. And Jesus' stories did that. When you heard one of his stories, you were either motivated to love him more or motivated to hate him more. But one way or the other, you were going to be motivated. So they're simple, they're timeless, they're demographic proof. They're also contagious. And if you turn with me to Mark 1, 40 through 45. And by contagious, I mean they can spread like wildfire without really any additional effort from the storyteller. Now, in human terms, it's the story of the big fish. As you keep telling it or other people keep telling it, that fish gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But it wasn't like that with Jesus. If we look at his fame and how it was spread. And we can read starting at verse 40. And there came a leper to him, beseeching him, and kneeling down to him, and saying unto him, If thou wilt, thou canst make me clean. And Jesus, moved with compassion, put forth his hand. And I love that. I love that Jesus was moved with compassion. That he could relate. And put forth his hand, and touched him, and saith unto him, I will, be thou clean. And as soon as he had spoken, immediately the leprosy departed from him, and he was cleansed. And he straitly charged him, and forthwith sent him away, and saith unto him, See thou say nothing to any man, but go thy way, show thyself to the priest, and offer for thy cleansing those things which Moses commanded for a testimony unto them. Okay? So Jesus even went the extra mile and said, Hey, I did this good thing, I healed you, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. And like every good sinner, he went and did the complete opposite of what Jesus said. But he went out, and somebody might say, oh man, but he had leprosy. Like, that was not good back then. And here you are, healed by Jesus Christ himself. I don't know. I mean, that's a lot to contain, to just kind of keep to yourself. Yeah, I was healed by Jesus. I mean, who healed you? Well, Jesus did. It's like, I can see, I'm not agreeing with it, but I can understand. But he went out and began to publish it much, and to blaze abroad the matter, insomuch that Jesus could no more openly enter into the city, but it was without in desert places. He had to go out into desert places, open places where people are, and they came to him from every quarter. So all Jesus did was heal this leper. And this leper went out and told everybody this story. And in a matter of no time, Jesus couldn't even get into the city. The people were mobbing him. They wanted to be healed. So good stories are contagious. And the storyteller doesn't even have to be part of that. And this is a perfect example. Jesus is like, don't tell it. Stories are easy to remember. According to psychologist Jerome Bruner, facts are 20 times more likely to be remembered if they are part of a story. Organizational psychologist Peg Newhouser found similar results in her work with corporations. She found that learning derived from a well-told story is remembered more accurately and for far longer than the learning derived from facts or figures. So even if the story gets distorted, okay? If I tell you the story and then, it's the telephone game. Even if that story gets distorted, I'm pretty much betting that at least the moral value or what lesson was to be taught gets passed along. Gets passed along. So that's what makes them easy to remember. They also inspire. Stories motivate us to action. And that inspiration can be hope. My story about my son. Well, that gives other people hope who might go through something similar. That's inspirational. Or it may inspire you to be a better person or to do something different. If you turn with me to Ruth 1:16 through 18. The story of Ruth is inspirational. I mean, here you have this young woman whose father-in-law is dead and whose husband and brother-in-law have both died recently. And now Naomi, her mother-in-law, is heading back to her homeland. And Naomi tells both Ruth and Orpah, her daughter-in-laws, to stay behind. I'm going back home. I've got nothing for you. Got no husband. I can't, if I was to get another husband and raise kids, you're going to be all old. Okay? You're not going to wait for them. Which Orpah agrees to do. But if we look at what Ruth said, and Ruth said in verse 16, and Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave thee, or to return from following after thee. For whither thou goest, I will go, and where thou lodgest, I will lodge. Thy people shall be my people, and thy God, my God. Where thou diest will I die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more also, if aught but death part thee and me." When she saw that she was steadfastly minded to go with her, then she left, speaking unto her. And if you notice, that word God is capitalized. God, my God. And that word Lord is all capitals. So she was talking about the right God. It wasn't that she was going with Naomi ignorantly, little God to little God. Yeah, you worship this pagan God, I'll go worship that, little g to little g. She had an understanding of Naomi's God. She had an understanding of Naomi's Lord. And she was willing to forsake everything. Her home, her family, her mother, her father, whatnot, to go be with Naomi and to worship her God. That's inspirational. If we look at things in our life, things that we've had to give up or things that we might have to give up to follow the Lord. These stories are in the Bible to inspire us, to give us hope, to motivate us. Hey, it worked for this person. God stayed with them. God helped them. There's nothing that says He won't do that for me. These stories build credibility and trust. If you think about it, somebody will say to me, "Do you understand everything in the Bible? Do you understand everything the Bible says?" Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But everything the Bible has told me, all the stories that the Bible has told me that I understand, all those stories that map to experiences in my life that are true and right, have built up trust and credibility with me, so that when I get to a part I don't understand, or maybe I'm confused by, I'll give the Bible, I'll give God the benefit of the doubt, because all this other stuff has spoken to me and has been so right in the past. I'm not going to throw it away. I'm not going to throw all this away because there's one thing I might not understand. So look at those stories. They should inspire. They should motivate you. Stories appeal to all types of learners. In any group, roughly 40% of the people will be predominantly visual learners who learn from videos, diagrams, or illustrations. So, if I had a PowerPoint document up here, 40% of you would be like, "Yes, I love it. I love it." Okay? If I put a movie up here, there'd be 40% of you that would be all over that. Okay? Another 40% will be auditory, learning best through lectures and discussions. Okay? My daughter Lexi is highly auditory. That girl, she listens to audible books and she can just repeat them, memorize them. But that's how she learns. That's how she learns. Okay? Then there's The last 20% are kinesthetic learners who learn best by, this is my dad, who learns best by doing, experiencing, or feeling. You got to be out there living it. You got to be out there living it. Storytelling has aspects that work for all three of those types. Visual learners appreciate the mental pictures storytelling evokes. Okay? Visual. So there are some people that are such visual learners, they don't even want to go see a movie. They don't even want to see a television show. They'd rather just read the book because they like the images that they made. How many times have you read a book and gone to the movie and said, why did they cast that person? That is nothing the way that I pictured them. That's a visual learner. Visual learners will form mental pictures. Auditory learners, they focus on the words and the storyteller's voice. So if you've got an auditory person and you're telling them a story in a very monotone, they'll probably check out. That's what they're listening for. That's what they're listening for. And if you think about it, I'm sure Jesus was a master storyteller as far as Paul was rude in speech. I don't think we ever heard that about Jesus. But I'm sure that he just wove those stories in such a way that auditory learners would be very motivated by them. And then lastly, kinesthetic learners remember the emotional connections and feelings from the story. Okay? So, kinesthetic, you watch a movie. What is it? There's this one movie called Miracles Are from Heaven. Okay? I don't agree with everything in there. Okay? So don't watch it and say, oh my goodness, I can't believe this guy likes this movie. But it's one of those movies, again, somebody's going to die, but they don't die, so I wrecked it for you. But somebody's going to die, and it's this mother and her daughter. And her daughter's got this disease, and they just can't figure out what's going on. And a lot of these movies, there's usually one part that just tugs at your heartstrings, and it's like, okay. But this one, it must have did it like 3 times. Like, you're just going up and down with this family. And by the end, it's like, you're just a wreck. You're just a wreck. Another example would be we watched this movie called Greater about this football player. And he's a good guy. And, of course, he dies towards the end of it. But you just get so attached to this guy that when he dies, I remember my family hated me for it. Like, I had 3 of them that were in tears that swore to me that I was never allowed to pick a movie again. But that's kinesthetic. You get sucked in, your emotions get pulled in, you're vested. You're vested. Now, you'll probably have some combination of these when you're watching a movie or when you're reading a story. And you'll see that not today, but later on, you'll see that as Jesus weaves his story, how he pulls this group in and how he pulls this group in. Or he does the bait and switch. He gets you thinking that you're this group, and then by the time he gets done, bam, you're this group. Sneak preview, David, when Nathan came to him. Right? You remember that story with the story of the lamb? Oh boy, you talk about a bait and switch. David got sucked right into that trap. But we'll talk about that. But that's the appeal of stories. They draw in different types of learners. Stories also fit best where most learning happens. According to communication expert Evelyn Clark, up to 70% of the new skills, information, and competence is acquired through informal learning. And by informal learning, I mean there's no set objective in terms of learning outcomes, and it's never really intentional. Okay? I'll use the example, I'm going to use a sports example. A lot of sports today, okay? Remember when we were growing up? Some of you may have to go back a little bit farther. But when I grew up and we played baseball, there was only community baseball. Okay? We had an American League. We had a National League. We had 12 teams in the American League, 12 teams in the National League. At the end of the season, there was an all-star game. There was a World Series. It was great. It was great. And then you had one travel team. At the end of the season, they go around, they get the best kids, and they go off, travel team. You are done with baseball by maybe the beginning of August, okay? Fast forward to today. We've got travel teams. Kids go get trained, okay? They're spending 3 days a week training on pitching or hitting or catching, and they're in this organizational league and this organizational league and that organizational league. There's all this organization. And if you look at the studies, especially in areas of like baseball and even from basketball, they're finding that the kids aren't, even though we think they're getting better, they're not getting better because they're not learning how to play the game. Take basketball players. One of the struggles that coaches have with basketball players in the college level is that all through high school they've been taught plays. We're going to run play X. We're going to run play Y. Well, when you get to college, they don't run play X. They might run play Z. Or when you get in the pros, they might not have really any plays. The fact of the matter is that informal learning is more of play. Just play, without so much the organization. So when you look at informal teaching or you look at informal learning, it's basically where you're in your natural environment and you're just doing what you do. You're figuring things out kind of on your own. There's no intention. There's no intention. It's just happening around you. This is the bedrock, or storytelling is that bedrock of informal learning. And people, and by people, I'm talking about people in the Bible, regular people. If you look at Jesus' audience, the majority of them were regular people. And if you turn with me to Matthew 24, 7 through 9. And a lot of Jesus' teaching was just sitting down, up on a mountain, maybe on a boat. I know he went to the synagogue and talked, talking to the woman at the well. A lot of just informal experiences at the dinner table. But we read, therefore, whosoever heareth these sayings of mine and doeth them, I will liken them unto a wise man, which built his house upon a rock. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell not, for it was founded upon a rock. And every one that heareth these sayings of mine, and doeth them not, shall be likened unto a foolish man, which built his house upon the sand. And the rain descended, and the floods came, and the winds blew, and beat upon that house, and it fell. And great was the fall of it. And it came to pass, when Jesus had ended these sayings, the people were astonished at his doctrine. For he taught them as one having authority, and not as scribes. So here they are. These people, their intention was not, hey, I'm going to learn all this good stuff from Jesus. I'm going to get really deep and get a deep... It was a very casual environment. Jesus started talking, laid out some points, and now he's going to back it up with this story, with this analogy. And what was the result? The people were amazed. They were astonished. They were astonished. They did not set out to learn what Jesus was going to teach them. That's also the power of reasons why we tell stories. So I got 2 more pages, and then we're going to pick this up in a part 2. Stories also put listeners in mental learning mode. Listeners who are in critical or evaluative mode are more likely to reject what's being said. Okay? So you find those people, those data people. They just got to have the facts. And that's all they're looking for. And you can tell. It's like, just relax. Let me tell you my story. Oh, I don't want to hear the story. No, you got to hear the story. You got to go on this walk with me. You got to go on this journey with me. Storytelling recreates in us that emotional state of curiosity, which is ever present in children, but which we as adults have a tendency to lose. My mom and I are notorious for this. Give me the bottom line. I don't care what your reasons are. Just tell me what the result is, okay? I'm crazy, you're crazy, we're not going to agree on certain things. Let's just get right down to the nitty-gritty. But that's not right necessarily, because a lot of times it does good to hear that story, to hear the reasons behind why people are doing things. When we are in this childlike state of being open to stories, in this mental learning mode, we tend to be more receptive and interested in the information we are given. So I'll tell you a story. I don't know who's familiar with the animated film called An American Tail. Okay, it's about this stupid mouse, Feifel. Okay, he's a Russian mouse. I don't know why he's Russian, but he's Russian. And he's separated from his parents on the way to America, the land of no cats. Okay, apparently mice and cats don't like each other. In this movie, it's also famous for the song Somewhere Out There. Okay, the stupid mouse sings the song Somewhere Out There in his cute, mousy voice. Okay? So we're at my house, and my brothers and I, we're teenagers. Okay, definitely not thinking that, hey, I want to watch An American Tail. You know, that sounds like a great movie. Okay, but for some reason, it's playing in our family room. I don't know if it was my sister was watching it. I don't know if we were older and it was my niece watching it. I don't know. But this movie is playing on the television, okay? One by one, my brothers and I come into the room. Several minutes apart. We walk in and we stand there. You're watching the movie. Like 30 seconds go by. Minute go by. You kind of work your way over to the couch. You know, you're not fully committed yet. The stupid mouse. You're not sure what's going on. Next thing you know, you're kind of bending down. You're nestled in on the couch. And then you're like, okay. Watching this movie. And then you see Mark walk in. Kind of the same thing. And then Chris walks in. And in the same thing. And here we all are. Like nearly grown men watching this stupid mouse, okay, and all his trials and tribulations. And then he comes on with this stupid song, okay, Somewhere Out There. Again, he's singing it in his little cute mousy voice. You know, how whatever, his parents are looking at the same stars as he is. And you could just tell, like you're looking at all these near-grown men, and they're just, like, you could see it. You know what I mean? Like people are going like this, or, you know, like I got something in my eye. Did we consciously set out to watch American Tail? I know I did not. I did not. And will not ever watch that movie again. Okay? But that story deceived us. It tricked us. We weren't in a state. We were in an informal environment. But it pulled us in, and good stories do that. They stop people in their tracks from what they're doing. They open up their posture, and people just listen. You know, I think about Jesus. How many stories did Jesus tell where people are walking by and, what did that guy say? You know, and it's like, come back and be, wow, amazing stuff. But that's good stories. Put listeners in a mental learning mode, whether they want to be or not. And the best ones just kind of pull you in. Okay, and then lastly, telling stories shows a respect for the audience. Stories get your message across without arrogantly telling listeners what to think or do. Regarding what you think, storytelling author Annette Simmons observed, stories give people the freedom to draw their own conclusions. Turn with me to Matthew 18, 21 through 35. Telling a story where you underline the moral is a great way of explaining to people what needs to be done without telling them, do this. Then came Peter to him and said, Lord, how oft shall my brother sin against me, and I forgive him? Till 7 times? Jesus saith unto him, I say not unto thee until 7 times, but until 70 times 7. Okay, Jesus answered this question with the PowerPoint, right? Hey, how many times do I need to forgive them? Oh, here you go. 70 times 7. Okay, and we'll see how much that stuck with Peter here. Therefore is the kingdom of heaven likened unto a certain king, which would take account of his servants. And when he had begun to reckon, one was brought unto him, which owed him 10,000 talents. But for as much as he had not to pay, his Lord commanded him to be sold, and his wife, and children, and all that he had, and payment to be made. The servant therefore fell down and worshipped him, saying, Lord, have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. Then the Lord of that servant was moved with compassion and loosed him and forgave him the debt. But the same servant went out and found one of his fellow servants, which owed him 100 pence. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me thou owest. And his fellow servant fell down at his feet and besought him, saying, Have patience with me, and I will pay thee all. And he would not, but went and cast him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what was done, they were very sorry, and came and told unto their Lord all that was done. Then his Lord, after that he had called him, said unto him, O thou wicked servant, I forgave thee all thy debt, because thou desirest me. Shouldest not thou also have had compassion on thy fellow servant, even as I had pity on thee? And as his Lord was wroth, and delivered him to the tormentors, till he should pay all that was due unto him, so likewise shall my heavenly Father do also unto you, if ye from your hearts forgive not every one his brother their trespasses. So even in this case, he gave him a number, 70 times 7. But then he walked him through this story, this example, where Peter could draw his own conclusions. Which one was Peter identifying with? Was he identifying with the guy who was forgiven much, that wouldn't forgive his other fellow servant? He can draw his own conclusions. And we'll see that in the next time, especially when we look at the story of David and Nathan, as I mentioned. Nathan weaves this story that David is just humming along with. Oh yeah, I'm not that rich man. I'm not that rich man. And what does Nathan do at the end? Tells him, you are that rich man. And David will ultimately come to his conclusion himself. He didn't even put up a fight when he did it. But we'll look at that later. But in closing, I just want us to take a step back. You know, if you had to say, well, what should I leave with today, and what should I be prepared for 3 years from now when he does part 2 of this sermon? Right, I got to check James, Conrad, put some notes in there. Technology sermon, right? I can space it out. But is to think about the power of storytelling. Think about it from the books you read, the movies you watch, the television you watch, the stories you read in your Bible. What is it communicating to you? You know, is it motivating you? Be wary of the chemical effects on you, those call to actions and the things that can manipulate you, that can inspire you, that can influence you for good. You know, these stories are things that anybody can tell. They're not demographic in nature. They're timeless. They're a great learning experience. They appeal to multiple audiences. You can pull your audience in. It's ways that you're going to learn better. You know, again, PowerPoints versus stories. How would you rather learn? And the Bible uses these as an awesome mechanism to teach us about God, to teach us about His kingdom, and to teach us about what He expects out of mankind. Next time, though, I would like to dig a little bit deeper into story structure, because that's where things really start to get fascinating, is how you structure a story and the rules for structuring a story, and how the Bible hits every single one of those dead on. It's amazing. And then, you know, how can I use this storytelling in my personal life, my professional life, and more importantly, in my spiritual life when it comes to dealing with myself, dealing with others, especially my children and other people in your life. So, thank you for your time. And James, let's go. It's a wrap.